Hi, welcome to H3 Live. You're here with Trish and Steve. Hey, Steve Bose.
Hey Trish, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here for this new H3 Live series in conjunction with our new 2026 Workplace Trends Report.
Yeah, I'm excited too. So, for those of you who have not seen it, we have our 2026 Workplace Trends Report out, and it's quite hefty. It is almost 200 pages, but in order to do things that are going to make it more manageable to be useful, one of the things we're going to do is this monthly series where we talk about one of the trends in particular, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into why it's important. So, here we are today, and we're welcoming you to the first in the series. Steve, why don't you
Yeah,
kick us off and tell us a little bit about the conversation for this month?
yeah. This month we're talking about the organization and leadership and culture. So that's a lot, right? But it sets up the entire report and it really sets up the entire conversation, we think, for 2026, the important conversations that organizations need to have. We feel like the world is changing so much, both technologically, societally, culturally, generationally in the workplace,
Mhm.
that leaders in particular are really under a lot of pressure and stress and are being thrust into a world they're really not prepared for. And one of the ways that we recommend, right, that organizations can try to navigate through this is to really lean in heavily to their culture. And we talk a lot about in the report why culture is the strength of the organization. And it's probably more important than ever in 2026 with what's going on in the world.
Yeah, I mean you're right on the nose there with that. I think when we think about culture, it's usually something that seems hard to understand or attain a good culture, right? There are so many different mechanisms that impact our culture. And one of them being kind of what you're mentioning, the things that are going on externally from the organization certainly are impacting us. And so 2026 is not just about technology, right? We talk a lot about technology and how it enables organizations and it enables leaders to have those conversations. But this is something where when things are moving so fast externally, whether it's economics, politics, social issues, it impacts how people show up day to day. So, one of the things that I know in this report we touch on is really all those different levers that build trust between the organization and the employees. Steve, I know that's something that you've touched on in other podcasts we've done, but maybe talk about that level of trust and how what we're doing as leaders really impacts the way that people show up to work.
Sure, because what employees expect and demand, right, increasingly, and they need in order to thrive are things like transparency,
Mhm.
accountability, a purpose, right, authenticity from their leaders, right, connection. They want to build connection in their workplaces. And those things combine and coalesce to create an environment of trust, an environment of safety. Those things are critically important because a lot of things outside work are also scary and we don't trust them and we're concerned, right? And
Mhm.
it's a really crucial time, I think, in organizations, particularly here in the US, where building that connection and building that trust and fostering a culture of connection and trust is going to be a competitive advantage. It's uh, it's in the report, Trish. You wrote this line, and I'm going to quote you because you wrote this. You wrote in our report, culture is now recognized as an economic driver, not just an HR aspiration, right? And I think we've been talking about culture for a long time in HR circles. I don't think it's been as meaningful and as critical, perhaps, as a priority than it is this year, which is why we talk about it so much in our report.
Right. I think you're right. We have talked about it for years. And when I was more junior in my career, I used to think, culture was something that you couldn't stabilize, right? Because there are so many different impacts and things that change, right? If even one person leaves your team, for example, it sort of changes the culture. But I think as we've grown and matured and done more research on culture in general, I think what we're seeing is that people, when they feel they have stability, they're much better at performing. And so I think that's why I came up with that idea around it really is an economic factor, not
Hmm.
just a social factor. And
Yeah.
sometimes in HR, we've had some struggle of like connecting those dots. but that's it. I think if people feel safe, it helps that sense of calm, and it does help you feel like your organization is sort of a protective layer sometimes. When everything else is chaotic, you
Mhm.
have that stability in your life, which is the organization and the work you're doing, right?
Yeah, super, super important, and a big theme of our report this year. Another area, Trish, I think it's worth diving into, which is highlighted here in this section in this month's kind of collection of resources that we're providing, is what's happening with technology and how that's impacting organizations and impacting leadership. Now, later in the report, we dive very heavily into some very specific kind of technological innovations and developments and why they matter. But this is a
Mhm.
little bit more generally like, what does AI in particular, what does it mean for the organization and how does it impact how leaders have to respond in this moment? And I think we've got some really interesting insights around that.
Yeah. You mentioned AI, and we can't have any conversation anymore, right, without AI. But I think we're moving into a really interesting space this year because last year and the year before were a lot of what is it? And oh my gosh, it's going to do all these things and we're going to get rid of all the jobs. One thing I know you've said, which I really love, is that, when AI is part of the equation in how technology helps and aids these things that we're needing to do, it actually means more leadership than ever before, right? It's not a replacement. AI isn't going to come
Yeah.
in and lead your team. AI isn't going to come in and do all the work. That's not the point of it. So I hope what people take away from this particular collection and this report is that it's about being a more insightful, attuned leader with AI enabling that information so that you're not spending all your time just doing kind of the nuts and bolts and
Yeah.
data gathering yourself, right? Using AI where it makes sense so that you can spend more time truly leading people. And I think
Yeah.
that that's really important for leaders to understand.
Yeah, we see a world where AI increasingly handles things like transactions and processes, which allows leaders to dive more deeply into culture and meaning and connection. A world where AI increases visibility into people's skills and their
Mhm.
potential and surfaces opportunity and hopefully makes opportunity more equitably distributed in the organization, both inside the organization and potentially with folks you might be considering bringing into the organization, right? As you're going through that process. And we think AI will require better leadership, more connected leadership, and more empathetic leadership, and not less, right? We can't, like you said it so eloquently, Trish, we can't outsource or cede our leadership and our empathy to AI because it's not capable of doing that. So it's a big
Right.
issue in 2026. We're diving into it heavily, of course, like everyone is, but we're covering it, I think, from a slightly different point of view, at least in this part of the report, in this
Yeah.
collection, which I don't think, quite frankly, lots of folks talk about, and maybe they should.
Yeah, I think people, our brains sort of work in silos sometimes, right? And organizations work in silos. So I think, even if you look at what we've been doing over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, right? As a company, we have been much more focused on things like caring or well-being or connection, right? But those are like sort of as individual topics, right? We would do a show about well-being. We do a
Hmm.
show about, and I think what we've seen both personally as business leaders ourselves and with all these multitude of people we've been talking to over the years on the podcast, it's about then how do you sort of take those topics from being standalone and combine those as your actual business strategy, right? We sort of
Yeah.
think as in the past, it's like business strategy is more operational, it's more data driven, it's more technology driven. And then you sort of have these little feel good things off to the side. What we're proposing for 2026 and what's really different from what we're hearing anywhere else is actually taking the little softer side of things that is part of your business strategy. Maybe
Hmm.
talk a little bit about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think it's so critically important and right on the money. You mentioned well-being and caring and caregiving, right? We lean into that so heavily in this report. We touch on it in this collection, of course, too. And then we have a whole nother section on it later in the report. We'll be talking about in depth,
Yeah.
but well-being moving completely from just a set of benefits programs or something that's kind of just the specific domain of HR professionals only to a core operating principle in the organization and fundamental to the organization's ability to succeed, whether it's stress, burnout, pressures of caregiving, financial stress. Leaders have to be aware of these realities. And so often they haven't been, right? We've been wanting to sometimes we say, well, that's HR's thing, right? That's the benefits department's thing. Or sometimes even that's not our thing at all as an organization. It's not our
Mhm.
job as the organization to worry about whether or not you know how to budget, right, for your own finances, right, or something like that. And I think that's changed in many ways, Trish. It seems to me that the lines between business success and employee well-being, there's no more separation. I think they're intertwined and intermixed. And um, again, a topic we've been talking about a lot, right, in this space for a long time. Well-being is not a new thing, right? We've been
No.
talking about it for 15 years.
Yeah.
But much like some of the other problems we've talked about for a long time, it still hasn't been adequately addressed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it, and we still are, and it's more important than ever.
Well, that's where technology, as it's been accelerating, is helping us. And again, I think if we have any message to leaders or employees in general, right? Because hopefully everyone still continues to, take on more responsibilities and have a bigger role within their team. I
Yeah.
think that technology is just the means to support our people. And we've talked for years about bringing your whole self to work. And again, sometimes I've been cynical about this. Maybe you have been too over the
Oh,
years.
I have been.
But I think now, and maybe it's with experience, right? And just age ourselves. It's really understanding that our employees are watching what we do every minute as a leader. So not only if we try and divide like what's happening at home or what's happening out in the world from what we're doing at work, it's not rational, I think. It
Right.
makes sense to in order to have an employee be successful, which we talk about all the time over all these years, you have to look at their whole life. So, again, I was of the camp of maybe, "Oh, we don't need to deep dive into people's finances, right? They need to opt in." Of course they do. But it is highly impactful to the work they do. It's highly impactful to the way they impact your organization's customers or your product. And so to sort of keep that off to the side is no longer realistic. If you really want to be a successful business, if you want to be a successful leader and have your team delivering successful results, you need to look
Yeah.
at the whole picture, right? And one thing, you said yesterday something about trust. We were having a conversation and how that is really important. And it's such a fragile thing. I'd love for you to just share some of your thoughts around just how that all fits together.
Yeah, I mean, well, technology is accelerating, right?
Mhm.
Demands on people are increasing. Pressure on
Yeah.
organizations have never been greater. Organizations are responding in lots of different ways. Many are sadly resorting to things like layoffs and downsizing and sort of looking to technology to replace a lot of the functions that people are doing, even if they're not saying it. The level of trust that in general that we see from workers in workplaces that they have in their organizations is declining, and organizations are going to need to realize that they need to consider this as they make their decisions around organizational design and structure and investments into employees and technology. The organizations that will succeed, we think, this year and moving forward will be the ones who care the most about their people and of course their customers too, and not just the ones who become the most efficient, right? That's a
Right.
short-term goal and probably not a long-term set of success. Trish, there's lots more in the report. We would
Yeah.
encourage folks to check it out as well as all the other resources in our collection, and keep checking back with us every month or so for the next installment in this new H3 Live series.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening, everyone.